Have you ever given your entire soul to the people you love, only to become invisible in the very home you built for them? That's where my story begins on the night their laughter broke. Me, if you've ever felt overlooked, forgotten, or pushed into the background of your own life, stay with me because what I'm about to share isn't just my story, it could be yours too. Before we dive in, do me one favor, hit subscribe, tap that bell so you never miss a story like this, and drop a comment telling me, have you ever felt invisible in your own home? Your words might help someone else feel less aloof. House smelled of rosemary and lemon that night. It was the kind of smell that carried both comfort and sorrow. Comfort because it reminded me of Sundays when Leo was small, his laughter spilling through the kitchen while I sprinkled herbs over chicken and he begged me to let him. Help sorrow because I realized how little of that laughter belonged to me anymore. I had been in the kitchen for hours, my hands stiff with age, still moved with practiced grace, chopping carrots into neat coins, basting the chicken so the skin glistened, stirring the gravy until it thickened into silk. I could almost pretend I was cooking. For the boy he once was not the man who now walked past me as if I were a shadow. Every detail had been tended to the table, was draped in crisp white linen, pressed until not a wrinkle dared remain. I had polished the silverware until my own reflection stared back at me, distorted and faint. The wine glasses caught the light of the candles, glowing like little lanterns of glass, but none of it mattered because deep down I already knew the truth. No matter how perfect the table looked, I would not be seen still. I clung to habit. I clung to the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. I sat 3 places, though I would not truly be part of the feast. One for Leo, one for Sophia, and one for myself, though my plate would remain mostly untouched, a prop in a play where I was always cast as the background. Sound of the door opening pulled me from my thoughts. Their voices floated in. Before they did, laughter bright and unrestrained, tangled with the rustle of coats and the clicking of heels. I paused at the table, hands pressed flat against the linen, listening. Sophia's voice was the first to reach me, lilting and confident. Leo's followed, his tone softer, warmer, filled with a joy I hadn't heard directed at me in years. When they entered, they were a picture, 2 young people wrapped in the glow of their own world. They didn't look tired from the day. They looked alive, alight, as though the air itself bent to follow them. Dinner's ready, I said, the words coming out quiet, almost apologetic. Sophia's eyes swept across the table for a moment. I thought she might say something kind. Her lips curved, and I braced myself for a word of gratitude. Looks nice, she said. Just that flat, polite, detached. Leo didn't say anything at all. 3 of us sat. They leaned toward each other's shoulders, brushing hands, occasionally grazing. I moved around them, filling glasses, serving portions, my presence more like that of a waitress than a mother. The smell of rosemary and lemon was strongest, now wrapping around the room like invisible arms, but they didn't notice. They were too busy with each other, too wrapped in their shared bubble. I tried to join them. Once I tried to step into that circle of warmth that excluded me. The roses in the garden bloomed this week, I said softly, careful not to interrupt too loudly, careful to sound light and pleasant. My words hung in the air for a brief second and then dissolved. Sophia leaned closer to Leo, whispered something, and he burst out laughing. His laughter was sharp, full, spilling over like wine that had no container. He laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink, and just like that, I vanished. Shetty sat there watching them, the food. I had labored over losing all flavor in my mouth. My fork clinked against the plate, but neither of them noticed. The roasted chicken that should have been juicy and tender tasted like ash. The potatoes that glistened with butter turned heavy, bland. Even the wine I sipped to soften the moment was bitter on my tongue. Across from me, Leo's face shone with a kind of light I hadn't seen since he was a boy holding up his school trophy, but that light wasn't for me anymore. It belonged to her. Sophia's laugh rang like bells. Her hand brushed his, and he leaned in closer as though every word from her lips was sacred. And me, I was a ghost at my own feast. He wondered as I sat there how I had become so invisible, how the boy who once clung to my skirts begging me to stay near him. In the dark now, couldn't even glance my way, their laughter grew louder, spilling over me, around me, through me, until I felt like the house itself vibrated with their joy. I wanted to smile. I wanted to be glad for him. After all, isn't that what a mother is supposed to do? Be happy for her child's happiness, even if it costs her own. But I couldn't, because joy that excludes, joy that erases, is not joy, it's cruelty. And as I sat there, the candles flickering against my untouched plate, I realized that I wasn't just invisible, I was unnecessary. That night at the table, when their laughter drowned me out, didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was years in the making, years of sacrifice, quiet choices, and silent wounds that built up like bricks, until they formed a wall between me and the boy I raised. When I think back, I see him first as an infant. The hospital room was dim, the night pressing against the windows, but when they placed him in my arms, everything lit up. He was so small, so fragile, his tiny fist curling around my finger, as if even then he knew I would be his anchor in that moment. I promised myself I will never let him go, without, not ever, and I didn't. When his father walked away, the world thought I would crumble. People whispered that I couldn't do it alone. I could almost hear their pity. Poor woman, she won't manage. But I did. I stitched clothes late at night, by the dull yellow glow of a single bulb, my eyes straining against exhaustion, my fingers raw from the needle. I worked 2 jobs, cleaning in the mornings, clerical work in the afternoons, just so the rent would be paid. Just so Leo would never feel the sharp edges of poverty the way I did. I pawned my wedding bangles, the last pieces of gold I owned, to pay his school fees. I told him they were in the drawer when he asked, too young to understand. But I still remember the cold emptiness of that drawer afterward, like a wound that would never close. There were days I went hungry. I would place food on his plate, smile, and pretend I was already full. He never noticed, and that was by design, because a mother's role, I believed, was to carry storms alone so her child could live under clear skies. And in those moments when he laughed at cartoons on our small flickering TV, or when he ran to show me his drawings with crayon-stained hands, I thought it's worth it. Every ache, every hunger pang, every tear, it's worth it. I remember his fevers, how I sat through endless nights with a damp cloth on his forehead, whispering prayers into the dark. I remember his first day of school, how he clung to my hand until he had no choice but to let go, and how I cried the whole walk home. I remember his teenage years, the slammed doors, the sudden distance, the way he began to see me less as his world and more as an obstacle. But even then, when anger filled his voice, I knew it was only because he felt safe enough to use it on me. I carried it without complaint. And then Sophia came. At first, I thought I was gaining a daughter. She was polite, almost eager to please. She asked about my recipes, borrowed my earrings for their engagement, smiled. When I offered advice, I thought, this is good, this is love, expanding, not shrinking. But slowly the shift began. Leo started calling her first when something good happened, a job promotion, a funny story, even a small inconvenience. Her number was the one he dialed. Mine became an afterthought. If it came at all, family dinners changed too, their private jokes, whispered glances, moments of intimacy that excluded me. They filled the table until I was left sitting at the edge, smiling politely, pretending not to notice. Sophia, without meaning to, or perhaps with full intent, became the center of his world, and I faded into the margins. I told myself it was natural. Children grow mothers, must step back, but I didn't realize that stepping back would mean vanishing altogether. I think of one night, especially. It was storming outside, thunder cracking against the sky, rain hammering the windows. I had made Leo's favorite curry, the way I always did on stormy nights, because he once told me it made him feel safe. I set the table, waiting for him to come home, but he didn't. He called later, his voice casual. We're at Sophia's parents' place tonight. Don't wait up. I looked at the curry, cooling on the table, the candles burning low, the house so quiet it seemed to sigh. I told myself it Didn't matter that he was happy, but when I packed the food into containers for the fridge, I felt something inside me wither. It wasn't that he loved her. That wasn't the crime. It was that in loving her, he forgot to see me, and that is the cruelest truth about sacrifice. It doesn't always make you cherished. Sometimes it makes you invisible. I often wonder if he even knows the price of the life he lives now. Does he remember that it was my hands that stitched his beginnings together, thread by thread, sacrifice by sacrifice? Or is all of that buried under Sophia's smile and the sound of their shared laughter? Perhaps, I'll never know, perhaps. That is the fate of mothers, to be the foundation, that no one sees the scaffolding taken down once the building stands tall, but that night at the dinner table, as I watched them glow in their own world, I felt the full weight of it. My sacrifices had not made me indispensable, they had made me invisible. The table gleamed that evening like something out of a dream, but dreams can deceive. I had worked for hours, polishing every corner of the dining room until it looked almost unreal. The white tablecloth was pressed smooth, falling in perfect folds. Along the edges, the silverware gleamed, reflecting tiny shards of candlelight. The wine glasses sparkled as though they held stars inside them, and then there was the food. The heart of it all, the roasted chicken golden and crisp juices shimmering beneath the skin. I had basted carefully with rosemary and lemon. The potatoes cut into wedges, their edges browned, just enough to give a soft crunch. Vegetables glistened in butter, arranged neatly like jewels on the platter. The gravy simmered low, thick and fragrant, ready to be poured. The smell filled the house, wrapping itself around every wall, every piece of furniture. Was the smell of love, of sacrifice, of history. And yet, as I stood there taking it in, I wondered who would notice. The sound of the front door opening broke the stillness. Their laughter came first, spilling in ahead of them. Full, alive, untouchable, I froze, my hands resting on the edge of the tablecloth. I listened. Sophia's voice, smooth and melodic, carried through the hallway. Leo's deeper laugh followed, the kind of laugh that came from a place of comfort, the kind of laugh he once shared with me long ago. Over burnt toast or silly bedtime stories, now it belonged to her. They entered the dining room carrying with them a glow that seemed to light the space more than my candles ever could. Sophia, radiant as always, leaned into Leo. He looked at her with eyes I remembered once being reserved for me. When I was the center of his little world. Dinner's ready, I said softly, forcing a smile onto my lips. Sophia's gaze swept across the table. She tilted her head, her lips curving into a polite smile. Looks nice, she said. Not beautiful, not thank you, just nice, a word you toss to a stranger who did their job, not to the woman who spent the day pouring her soul into every detail. Leo didn't say anything. He sat, pulling out a chair for Sophia before his own. I took my seat too, though I knew it was more out of formality than belonging. I was an ornament at the table, not a participant. As I served them, pouring wine into their glasses and water into mine, I tried to convince myself that maybe tonight would be different. Maybe a small gesture, a small conversation would pull me back into their orbit. I cleared my throat lightly. The roses in the garden bloomed this week, I said, my voice careful, hopeful. They're the brightest they've been in years. My words floated across the table like fragile glass, but before they could land, Sophia leaned closer to Leo. Remember what you said earlier, she whispered, her eyes glinting. Leo laughed, sharp and sudden, nearly spilling his wine as he shook his head. God, don't remind me, he said, still grinning. Their laughter intertwined, rich and private, weaving a net that caught them both, but let me fall straight through my words, dissolved into the air, forgotten before they were even heard. I sat back in my chair, my fork resting against the plate. The food in front of me blurred, the chicken, the potatoes, the vegetables. It all looked the same, but the taste was gone. The first bite I forced into my mouth was ash. I chewed slowly, staring down at the plate, but my ears caught every sound they made, the clinking of their glasses, the brushing of their hands, the rhythm of their voices rising and falling in perfect harmony. I tried again, once more, desperate for a thread of connection. It's been colder lately, hasn't it? I said softly. The evenings feel sharper. Sophia turned her head toward Leo as though she hadn't heard me at all. Do you think we should visit my parents next weekend? She asked. Leo nodded quickly, eyes only on her, of course. They'll be thrilled to see us, and that was it. My voice had vanished into nothingness again. I forced a smile. I told myself not to cry. Not here, not in front of them. Mothers don't cry at the dinner table. Mothers smile and nod, even as their hearts fracture piece by piece, but inside I was breaking. I looked at Leo, the boy I had carried through fevers, who once clung to me in the dark, whose laughter once belonged only to me, and I realized he didn't see me anymore. Not really, not as a person, not as his mother. He saw the woman who kept the house running, who cooked and cleaned, who was always there, but he didn't see me across from me. Sophia's hand brushed his again. Their smiles glowed, their laughter filled the air, and I sat silent, invisible, a ghost haunting the table. I had built the sound of their laughter, didn't just sting it. Hollowed me out, because joy, when you are excluded from it, becomes cruelty. By the time I excused myself, my voice barely rose above a whisper. Neither of them looked up, neither of them noticed, and in that moment I realized something I never wanted to admit. I wasn't just invisible at the table, I was unnecessary. Closed the door behind me quietly, almost guiltily, as if even in leaving the table I needed their permission. The latch clicked shut and the sound felt final, but the walls were not kind. Their laughter seeped through, muffled, but sharp enough to pierce each burst of joy. Rattled against the hollow of my chest, echoing like cruel reminders of the world I no longer belonged to. I pressed my back against the door as though I could block it out, as though my body could stop their voices from reaching me. My knees buckled, and I slid down until the cold floor caught me. The wood beneath me was hard, unforgiving, but not half as unforgiving as the realization clawing its way through me. I pulled my knees to my chest, wrapping my arms around them. My hands shook as they clutched at the fabric of my dress. I pressed the heels of my palms against my ears, desperate to silence the sound that laughter has a way of finding. Cracks it seeps in, no matter how tightly you try to shut it out. And so it did, slipping past my fingers, into my ears, into my heart. That laughter was once my life's music, Leo's giggles as a baby. When I blew raspberries on his stomach, his bursts of joy when he scored a goal in school football, the little laugh he gave. When I tucked him in and whispered a silly story, now that same sound was a weapon because it wasn't mine. Anymore, the tears came suddenly, hot, unstoppable, merciless. They slid down my face, pooling into the hollow of my collarbone, soaking into the neckline of my blouse. I tried to breathe quietly in case they might hear me, though. I knew they wouldn't. My sobs tore through me, sharp and broken, but in the world beyond my door, they were drowned by the chorus of their happiness. I thought of the nights I sat beside his bed, a damp cloth against his fevered forehead, whispering prayers with every shallow breath he took. I thought of the times I packed his lunch with scraps of my own meal, smiling as he ate while I went hungry. I thought of the nights I walked home from work in the rain, shoes soaked, body aching, but heart swelling, because he was safe, he was fed, he was dreaming, and now here I was alone, invisible. My chest hurt, the kind of hurt that isn't physical, but still feels like it might kill you. I pressed my hand against it as though I could hold the pieces together, as though I could stop the fracture from widening for this, for a life where my words were ignored, for a table where I was not seen, for a home where my very existence didn't matter. A mother isn't supposed to think these thoughts, isn't supposed to regret, but that night a forbidden thought rose in me like smoke. Maybe I gave too much, maybe in giving every part of myself away I had erased myself. The thought terrified me, because if it were true, then I had spent decades building a life that left me hollow. And what then? What was left of me? I looked around the room, my room, the bed plain and neatly made, the dresser with its collection of photographs, Leo in his little school uniform, Leo at graduation, Leo and Sophia on their wedding day, smiles, achievements. Milestones, all proof of a life built on my back. And yet, in every photograph, I was behind the camera, absent and visible. Even in memory, the walls pressed in tighter. Their laughter outside grew louder, spilling through the cracks, filling my solitude with the mockery of joy. I buried my face into my knees, rocking gently as though I could soothe myself the way I once soothed him. But the rocking didn't help. The sobs only grew quieter, more desperate, the kind that burn when they can't fully escape. And then came the silence, not theirs, mine, a hollow, heavy silence inside me after the tears dried up. The silence of a heart that has been wrung empty, the silence of realization, because in that stillness I finally saw the truth. Love without recognition isn't love at all. It's a prison, and I had been its prisoner for years. That night I didn't stop loving them. That wasn't possible. But I did make a decision, quiet and trembling. Deep in the marrow of my bones, if I was to survive, I had to choose myself for the first time in decades. I had to love myself more than the silence they gave. Meth night air pressed against the window cool. And still, as I finally rose from the floor, my legs trembled from sitting too long in grief, but they carried me anyway. There was no strength in me, only resolve, and sometimes resolve is stronger than strength. I looked around my room. The bed, neatly made, as always, held the imprint of a life lived in routine. The dresser sat heavy with framed photographs, Leo's milestones lined up in glossy images, his first toothless smile, his proud face in a graduation cap, the wedding photo where he stood tall beside Sophia, glowing while I hovered somewhere at the edge. They stared back at me like ghosts, proof that I had lived my as a backdrop. Always present, never centered. I reached for my shawl, worn soft over the years. Its faded threads carried my scent, my touch, my warmth. It wasn't just fabric, it was a piece of me. Wrapped around my shoulders like a shield. For a moment, I stood still, clutching it, listening. From the hallway, their laughter swelled again. Unbroken, effortless, as if the world was perfectly whole for them, while I sat shattered just a few walls away. But this time it didn't pierce me, it didn't break me, it freed me. I opened the door to my room this time. There was no hesitance, no creeping. My steps were steady, deliberate, echoing against the old floorboards. Each step felt like an announcement. I am still here. I passed the dining room. The candlelight flickered across their faces as they leaned close to each other, glasses, raised, laughter tumbling between them. Their plates were nearly empty, the chicken carved down to bones. They didn't look up for once. I was thankful, because if they had looked up, if they had asked where I was going, I might have faltered, and tonight I could not afford to falter. I walked slowly through the house, letting my eyes linger on everything. One last time, the framed paintings on the wall that I had chosen years ago, when money was tight. But I wanted beauty to live with us. The little shelf near the door where Leo once kept his school shoes, muddy, scuffed, growing bigger every year until they no longer fit the window ledge, where I used to place his favorite snacks, waiting for him to come running in after school. Every corner whispered a story. Every object carried my fingerprints, my sacrifices, my love, and yet none of it had been enough to keep me from vanishing in my own home. I reached the front door and placed my hand on the knob. For a moment, I froze. 1,000 questions clawed at me. Would this make me selfish? Would people call me ungrateful, a bad mother? Would history remember me not as the woman who gave everything, but as the one who walked away? My hand trembled, and I closed my eyes. Images flashed in the dark. Leo as a little boy, feverish and fragile, his small hand clinging to mine, me pawning my bangles, pretending it didn't hurt so he could wear a crisp uniform. Nights of hunger masked by a smile so he wouldn't worry. And then the image of the table tonight, his laughter not once turned my way, his eyes blind to me, his voice never calling my name. I opened my eyes again, and the truth settled heavy but clear. This wasn't selfishness, this was survival. I turned the knob. The door opened with a soft sigh, as though the house itself was relieved to let me go. The cool night rushed in, wrapping itself around me for the first time in years. I felt air that was mine alone, untouched by anyone. Elsa's expectations, I stepped outside behind me, their laughter carried on, spilling out faintly through the windows. It didn't falter, it didn't break. They hadn't noticed, they hadn't even paused, but ahead of me was silence, and the silence wasn't heavy, it wasn't suffocating, it was wide, it was open, it was possibility. I walked down the path, slowly, each step deliberate. My shawl tightened around me, its worn threads holding me steady. At the edge of the path, I stopped and turned back once. The house glowed softly in the night, candles flickering in the dining room where two people sat oblivious to the woman who had built everything around them. I stared for a long moment, not with bitterness, but with finality. That house had been my prison, my stage of invisibility, and tonight I had chosen freedom. When I turned back toward the road, the silence greeted me again this time. I didn't fear it. I welcomed it because for the first time in decades, I wasn't leaving them, I was choosing. Me at first, they didn't notice. Of course, they didn't. The night carried on as though nothing had changed. Plates were cleared wine. Glasses, emptied, jokes continued the rhythm of their joy, beat steadily uninterrupted. But silence has a way of creeping. And not suddenly, but slowly, like a shadow stretching at dusk. And in the days that followed, my absence began to press against them in ways they could not ignore. The first morning, Sophia came down, expecting the smell of breakfast, the familiar scent of Paratha's sizzling tea boiling. The table already set instead, the kitchen was still untouched, the counter bare, the sink empty. She frowned, glancing at Leo. Your mother didn't make breakfast? Leo shrugged. Maybe she overslept, but she hadn't overslept. She was Ganethi, rummaged through the fridge, settled for bread and jam, and ate in silence. No one refilled the sugar jar, no one reminded Leo to take his lunch, and though neither admitted it, something about the morning felt hollow. The second day, the silence grew heavier. The laundry sat in baskets, unfolded, the smell of worn clothes lingering in the corners. Sophia, irritated, began folding shirts, but stopped halfway, muttering, I don't even know how she organized these things. The garden, once alive with trimmed roses and watered soil, began to wilt under neglect. Leaves, sagged flowers, drooped weeds. Stretched higher, the air lost its fragrance of fresh blooms. Replaced by the dull scent of dust, and dried smells became their greatest struggle. Sophia tried cooking once, her hands unfamiliar with the spices, her timing off. The chicken came out undercooked, the rice clumped together. Leo forced a smile, chewing dutifully, but his silence betrayed him. This was easier when your mother. Sophia started, then stopped herself, swallowing the rest of the words, but the silence after her unfinished sentence was louder than the words themselves. The end of the week, the house no longer felt like theirs. It felt like something was missing. An invisible thread that once tied everything together, a rhythm that no one noticed until it stopped. At Leo came home late one evening, hungry and tired. He dropped his bag by the door and instinctively called out, "Ma'am." The word slipped from his mouth. Before he even realized it, he froze in the hallway, the sound hanging in the air, unanswered. Sophia looked up from the couch, her expression unreadable. She's not here, Leo. I know, he muttered, his voice suddenly softer, uncertain. He didn't call out again later that night. Perhaps curiosity gnawed at him. He walked into my room. The bed was neatly made, untouched since the night I left. The shawl I had taken left a faint emptiness at the edge of the chair where it usually rested, but everything else remained. The dresser with its photographs, the faint smell of lavender soap that lingered in the fabric of the curtains. He stood there for a long time, staring at the photographs. His own life flashed back at him, his first birthday, the medals from school, the day he graduated, his wedding day, all those moments preserved in frames, and yet in almost all of them I wasn't visible because I had been behind the camera, always behind, always invisibly made. In that moment, he finally felt it. The weight of my silence. I wasn't there to fold his clothes. I wasn't there to water his plants. I wasn't there to fill the air with the smell of home-cooked meals. I wasn't there at all, and in my absence, the house was no longer a home. I don't know what words passed between Leo and Sophia in those days. Perhaps there were arguments, Sophia frustrated with the sudden weight of responsibility, Leo quietly guilty but unwilling to admit it. Perhaps there were silences even between them when they felt the missing presence pressing against them like a shadow. But none of that mattered to me anymore, because my absence was not meant as punishment. It was a declaration. It was the first time in decades that I had said without words, I exist, I matter, and you will notice me when I am gone for so long. I believe that. If I just kept giving, they would see me, that if I stayed silent one day, the silence itself would speak, but it never did, so I left, and in leaving, I found the voice that had been buried inside me. My silence became louder than their laughter. My absence became more powerful than my presence ever had. The morning after I left, I woke to silence, but this silence was different. It didn't weigh on my chest. It didn't suffocate me like the walls of my old room had. This silence was mine, gentle, peaceful, a silence that welcomed me like an old friend. I sat up slowly, adjusting my shawl around my shoulders for a moment. Panic pricked at me. Years of habit made me think I should hurry, I should cook, I should prepare the table before they wake. But then I remembered there was no one waiting. I wasn't late. I wasn't failing anyone. For the first time in decades, I had no role to play. I brewed tea. Just one cup. The steam curled into the air, carrying the scent of cardamom. I sat by the window, the cup warm between my palms, and watched the sunlight climb slowly over the horizon. For years, mornings had been for others, waking before dawn, rushing to prepare meals, making sure uniforms were ironed, lunches packed. Everything perfect. My mornings were stolen by duty, but now this one belonged to me. The sip of hot tea burned slightly on my tongue, and I smiled. I couldn't remember the last time I smiled for something so small. Days that followed felt strange, almost foreign. My hands still itched with old habits. I found myself folding imaginary clothes, glancing at clocks as though I were late for tasks that no longer existed. But slowly I reminded myself worth does not need proving. Worth simply easy. Began walking in the evenings, the same streets I once rushed down with grocery bags cutting into my fingers now felt different, lighter. The air touched my skin gently. The crunch of leaves beneath my shoes became music. Children played on the sidewalks, their laughter ringing in the air, not sharp, not cruel, just pure. And I realized laughter in itself had never been the enemy. It was only painful when it excluded me. I picked up books again, novels I had once bought for myself, but never opened their spines, uncreased their stories. Waiting patiently for me to return, I sat by the window, with them, letting words carry me into worlds that asked nothing of me. I planted flowers in small clay pots on my window ledge, bright marigolds, gentle jasmine, and a stubborn rosebush that refused to bloom at first, but eventually surprised me with a single red bud. Every morning I watered them, not out of duty, but out of joy. And I wrote not lists of chores, not reminders of bills, but thoughts, feelings, memories. At first, the words came hesitantly, stumbling onto the page, but soon they flowed. Filling notebooks with the pieces of myself I had buried. Writing became a mirror, showing me the woman I had lost. Beneath motherhood, beneath sacrifice, beneath invisibility, and in that mirror, I began to recognize her again, the woman who once loved to sing while cooking, the woman who once dreamed of traveling to see the ocean, not in postcards, but with her own eyes, the woman who once wanted to paint, to fill canvases with colors. Brighter than her struggles, she was still here. She had been waiting for me all along. Don't know what Leo and Sophia said when they realized I was gone. Maybe guilt crept into their quiet moments. Maybe arguments arose when comfort slipped away. Maybe at night when the house grew too still, they felt my absence like a cold draft under the door. I don't know if Leo ever stood in the kitchen, remembering the smell of rosemary and lemon, realizing it no longer filled the air. I don't know if Sophia ever looked at the wilting garden and thought of the hands that once tended it with care. And maybe in their own way, they began to understand that love, when taken for granted, doesn't disappear it. walks away, but this story isn't theirs anymore, it's mine. I am not the invisible mother anymore. I am the woman who gave everything broken silence and finally chose herself that night. The night their laughter broke me was also the night I was reborn, and now, when I hear laughter, it doesn't wound me. It reminds me that joy exists and I can claim it for myself. Two, I walk with my head higher. I speak softer, but with weight. I smile not out of duty, but out of freedom, and for the first time in my life, I am visible to myself, and that is a nugget. So my story ends where it truly began on the night their laughter broke me, but also gave birth to someone I thought I had lost forever. If this story touched your heart, please like this video so it can reach others who may need it. Don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell because more stories like this are coming and I don't want you to miss them. And in the comments, tell me what was your breaking point, the moment you realized you deserved more. Your words might just give courage to someone else who feels invisible tonight, because maybe tonight is the night you choose to be seen. For years, I lived as a shadow in my own home. I gave and gave until there was nothing left of me. But silence, I thought sacrifice would make me indispensable. I thought invisibility was love, but that night, I learned the hardest truth of all. Sometimes you have to walk away, not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally remembered to love yourself. If you've ever felt erased, unheard, or invisible, know this: your story is not over. You are not a shadow. You are not a servant of everyone else's joy. You're a person. You matter, and you are allowed to take up space. That night, I chose to walk away. I was terrified, but in the silence that followed, I found myself again. I learned that sometimes absence can be louder than presence, and I discovered that being visible to yourself is the first step to being free. So if you're listening to this now, and you've ever felt what I felt, this is my hand reaching out to you. You are not invisible.